Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with our weekly update on social media. Thank you as always for joining us. A lot going on in the nation as the communist left rampages on college campuses across America, with the Biden administration essentially being AWOL as our country comes under assault again by the extremist left. And up in New York, you have kind of two sides of the same coin up in New York, with the Democratic Party show trial of President Trump that this week resulted in direct threats by the Democratic Party judge, politician up there, to jail President Trump for exercising his free speech rights. And on top of everything else, Judicial Watch is in a new court battle over the Biden audio tapes of his special counsel interviews with special counsel Hur. They are hiding them, and you'll be really outraged when you find out the reason why. And I'll talk about that in a bit. First up is the, I don't know, what do you think is more important? The communist rampaging on college campuses, or the efforts to destroy and hijack our elections by Democratic Party politicians here in Washington and up in New York and Fulton County, et cetera? Well, I think I'll go with the Trump issue, because I think that's more substantive in terms of the attack on your individual voting rights than however outrageous the communist insurgency is in the various campuses. We have another week of what I consider to be a political hostage situation. This is week 3, it just finished, of the Trump trial in New York over non-crimes. I'll say it once, I said it once, and I'll say it again. There were no crimes that Trump committed. They're making it up as they go along in that criminal trial. He's alleged to have falsified business records. In fact, he didn't falsify them. The business records at issue detailed legal payments as legal payments. And the allegation is that those falsifications, which really weren't falsifications, were all part of a conspiracy. Of course, he's not charged with conspiracy to violate federal campaign finance laws somehow. Now, you may wonder why it is the New York State prosecutors, the county prosecutor up in Manhattan, Alvin Bragg, the Soros-backed politician, thinks he can prosecute federal campaign finance violations. A, they're not, and B, he can't. And I've been waiting. I've been watching this trial for days on end. Obviously, I'm not in the courtroom, but I've been reading the reports very carefully, and I've yet to see any evidence of criminal activity presented to the jury. Zero evidence of criminal activity by President Trump. As I tweeted, still waiting for evidence of any criminal conduct in the Trump show trial, and that was on May 1st. And now what is the date? May 3rd? May 4th? Doesn't matter. There's no evidence of criminal activity by President Trump that's been brought forward by the left-wing prosecutor. Again, the #1 prosecutor in that office, working for Bragg here, is a former DOJ official appointed by Joe Biden. It's all you need to know. He moved over to help Bragg manufacture these charges to try to jail Biden's political opponent. So Biden's in deep. His regime is in deep with his fellow Democrats up there in New York. Indeed, it bears repeating because the media won't tell you this. The judge, who is a politician, he's elected, a Democratic Party politician, is an actual contributor to the Joe Biden presidential campaign. I mean, need I say more about how he's compromised? And of course, the way he's conducting the trial has been biased, political. Virtually every major ruling is alien to the very concept of the rule of law. He's allowed for weeks on end testimony that has nothing to do with the price of tea in China. Salacious testimony about President Trump's alleged affairs, why he was talking to the National Enquirer about stories and trying to manage stories, and just What does that have to do with anything? But there was evidence, it looks to me, of criminal activity presented in that trial. And it was the lawyer, Stormy Daniels, who looks like his legal practice in large measure is to represent individuals like Stormy Daniels who have information that could be hurtful to a public figure. And what he does is he goes and represents them, goes to the public figure and says, look, we have this information. You want to keep it quiet? Let's have an agreement and you give us consideration, meaning money, and we'll keep it quiet. He says it's not extortion. Others might disagree. And that's what they did with Trump. And he's done it with other figures as well. So that was like the most significant potential criminal activity, and I'm not even sure it's criminal, but the point is, it looks like Trump was in the trials confirmed what many suspected, seemingly, that Trump was the victim of an extortion attempt. So what has all of this resulted in? More threats to put Trump in jail. As I've been alerting you, the goal is to get Trump in jail by hook or by crook. They don't need a conviction because they've got this unconstitutional gag order, which is nearly impossible to interpret, and if broadly interpreted, would shut down the Trump campaign. And the news this week, besides the fact there's still no evidence that Trump committed a crime, is that Judge Merchant fined Trump $9,000 for posting posts on Truth Social on his campaign website, and he ordered him to take him down. And he said, essentially, if you continue to violate my gag order by exercising, he didn't use this language, your First Amendment God-given rights and campaign for president, I'm going to jail you potentially. And this is what he didn't want Americans to see, or he didn't believe Trump had the right to post. These are at least several of the posts that Trump had to take down. So he quotes Jesse Waters, the Fox News host. They're catching undercover liberal activists lying to the judge in order to get on the Trump jury. So he quoted him there. And then he retweeted a quote by Michael Avenatti, who was Stormy Daniels' lawyer for a while, and Avenatti is a criminal too. But he's been saying that this is all wet as well, and Trump said thank you. And then he points out this official statement by Stormy Daniels, who supposedly might be a witness, so he's not allowed to mention her. So Michael Avenatti can make comments one way or the other. Michael Cohen can make comments one way or the other. Stormy Daniels is a potential witness. He's not allowed to defend himself against these allegations. And in this statement Stormy Daniels signed, over the past few weeks I've been asked countless times to comment on reports of an alleged sexual relationship I had with Donald Trump many, 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 many years ago. The fact of the matter is that each party to this alleged affair denied its existence in 2006, 11, 16, 17, and now again in 2018. I'm not denying this affair because I was paid hush money, as has been reported in overseas owned tabloids. I'm denying this affair because it never happened. So of course Trump is going to be pushing that out. But now Merchant has ordered the suppression of First Amendment speech related to his defense and related to the presidential campaign of the United States of America. And this is my description of it. In a disturbing, unprecedented, and political attack on Trump's First Amendment rights, as I said, Merchant just fined and threatened to jail Trump over his campaign and other free speech that supposedly violates a political and abusive gag order. The Democratic politician ordered the censorship of Americans and voters by ordering Trump to take down the First Amendment protected post on Truth Social and his campaign website. Hashtag election interference. Hashtag banana republic. Hashtag kangaroo court. You agree? I'm not quite sure what the status of the gag order appeals are. They're obviously in force. So the judge this week has reminded Trump that everything he says can result in him going to jail based on the arbitrary and capricious application of this unconstitutional gag order by his Democratic Party opponent, Judge Merkin. And in effect, Judge Merkin, a Democratic donor, political candidate elected on the Democratic ticket to a judgeship, is now running the Trump campaign. So everything the Trump campaign says is restricted as it relates to this case by Judge Merchant. So he's controlling the Trump campaign. Do you think a local Democratic Party judge in New York should control a political campaign for the presidency through this wildly overbroad gag order? Gag orders, which typically, my understanding is, gag orders are meant to protect the defendant in criminal cases. The goal of the process in New York, or in a criminal case, is to ensure that the defendant's rights are protected. The defendant is presumed innocent. Again, presumed innocent. And let me say this for the record. Trump is an innocent man. And a judge is going to punish him for maintaining his innocence in public, and he could be jailed for his campaign doing the same in a presidential election. And in the meantime, as Trump is held political hostage up in New York, President Biden's able to go around campaigning unhindered. I mean, Keith Jarrett had a tweet or a column the other day, or my friend over at Fox News, he does a good job analyzing all of this. I think we have the tweet. Parody of a trial. Confuse the jury with jargon and create the appearance of illegality that doesn't actually exist. And that's what's going on in the trial. It's an unconscionable breach of ethics and a violation of a prosecutor's principal duty to see that justice is done fairly and impartially. Sadly, too, many prosecutors think their job is to gain a conviction by hook or by crook. Bragg stands as the poster child for amoral, ruthlessness. I agree. They're just throwing out all this dirt that has the appearance of, it's basically gossip. It's the Gossip Girl trial. And somehow Trump is guilty because of all this salaciousness they're talking about. I mean, as it relates to criminal activity, as alleged in an indictment, there's no tie, and Judge Merchant is just letting it happen. It's a kangaroo court. It's a show trial. And I'd like to know what Republicans are doing, that they're allowing this to go on with virtually no comment. I don't understand it. Honest Democrats should be opposed to it as well. I mean, Speaker Mike Johnson went up to Columbia, which I thought was a good move. He should have stopped in New York. Maybe the trial wasn't going on, but he could go up to New York and go to the trial and show his support. But I would think it would be good for other Republicans and honest politicians of either party to go up and show their support and take a stand by being present in court for President Trump in the face of this abuse of his civil rights. And believe you me, Judicial Watch has multiple Freedom of Information Act requests over this abuse of Trump. We have multiple lawsuits. I'm not just here talking about it. I mean, we've sued Bragg already for records. Got records showing he was spending a lot of taxpayer money trying to avoid testifying to Congress by hiring private lawyers. Kind of reminds me of a little bit of Fannie Willis. So that's where we stand with the Trump trials. In the meantime, I talked about what was going on as it relates to the Trump trials over on Fox News. I was on last week. Let's push that one out.
Let's dig into the details of what went down today in court with Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton. Okay, I'd love talking to you about this because I know you like to get into the weeds, but I'd love to get your reaction to what other legal scholars are saying about what we've been watching here. This is from Jonathan Turley, a man that you know very well. I want to get your reaction to what he said today, talking about the wisdom of even A, having this circumstance play out the way it is, and B, where we are now and where we're going. Listen to this.
This is 8 days that we've all been sitting in this courthouse. This is all a Biden indictment. It's in order to try and win an election, political opponent, and nothing like this has ever happened. 8 days.
We're left on Friday wondering what's the intelligent design here towards conviction. And one thing that would help if you would just tell us what's the crime.
He nails it. We talked about this for just a bit with Alex Warrior. This is federal from my perspective and my brief legal training. It seems mighty federal to me. So what's the crime here, and how does Mr. Bragg get this one over the finish line?
Well, hopefully it's a jury, from his perspective, a jury that's anti-Trump, and just putting salacious material out there about President Trump, they're thinking would be sufficient. For those of us concerned about the rule of law, Turley's absolutely right. There are no crimes here. This is an indictment about nothing. This whole week has been like an MSNBC fever dream played out in a courtroom, where they're asking this publisher questions about non-crimes. So it's a crime for politicians to communicate with members of the media about stories they don't want to run. I tell you, if that's the new rule, every politician here in D.C. is going to face criminal charges for not reporting those communications on federal election forms. It can't be the law, and it isn't the law. They're making it up as they go along. We're still not sure what the crimes are beyond detailing in his ledger a legal expense is a legal expense. This is a terrible abuse of power, and it's disturbing that the court and Judge Merchan has allowed it to even get this far.
But here's what I don't understand. I understand your point of view. It makes sense to me, and yet I watch legal analysts all day long on other networks suspend all disbelief. They simply go out there and they say, yep, looks like a crime is happening here, and they really don't seem to be backing up and saying, this is an abuse of power. If we're not careful, this will happen in other states. I mean, who's to say this doesn't happen to, say, President Biden when he's out of office? There could be some judge in Texas or some other state that decides on some, as some people have called it, trumped up charges related to whatever, and say, you know what, we're just going to bring up dirt.
Well, that's the danger when you have this normalization of the weaponization of government to go after your political opponents.
Right.
All bets could potentially be off, and it will disrupt the country because, as you say, you could have Republican attorney generals start targeting Biden.
Of course you can.
And you know, Biden should be praying that the Supreme Court agrees with Trump, because I can guarantee you there'd be many Republican attorney generals in the future who would want to go after him on criminal charges based on what he's doing right now.
100% believe that. Tom Fitton, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Have a great weekend. We'll see you again soon.
And here's a truth from Trump. Trump slams corrupt Judge Merchan and the kangaroo court process run by Democratic Party politicians in New York City. As Trump wrote, it's a total witch hunt, hours of sitting down and listening to nothing except exoneration and lies. The trial is going like a speeding bullet because the judge is working hard to make all of his friends happy. Burchin is rigged, crooked, and above all, without question, conflicted. It's a disgrace to the country. They've taken away my right to free speech, election interference. I agree with Trump's analysis 100%. And I tell you, we need more honest folks here in Washington, D.C., who, unfortunately, there aren't too many of, who see this corruption for what it is. Some of the worst abuse of a president and presidential candidate in the history of the United States of America. And it could upend our republic. I mean, and the corruption behind it is like seeping out. We have more information, for example, in this big case, the fake documents case that they're pursuing down in Miami against Trump. This is the Jack Smith machine under Joe Biden. These are documents that the judge, over the objections of the Biden regime, have unsealed, and the documents are showing further involvement beyond what we already knew, which was significant, of the Biden White House and top lawyers in the Biden administration with the targeting of President Trump on this sham records issue. It looks like they set him up, and it was done from the highest levels of the Biden White House. And I talked about this with Rob Schmidt at Newsmax just the other day, and it's worth sharing with you because it nicely sums up the corruption that Jack Smith has been exposed as protecting and covering up on behalf of the Biden regime.
Tom Fitton is the president of Judicial Watch. He joins us now, and I want to talk more about what we've learned here from what Eileen Cannon has revealed. It's amazing what's been exposed in just this one case and just how filthy this case is.
Well, we've seen this from the get-go. We had asked and pursued a lawsuit over these exact documents, got the Stonewall, but we did get documents initially showing that the Biden White House was helping move this case against Trump along. And I don't know how many meetings you need to have with the White House and archives and the special counsel and Justice Department before you realize that the Justice Department independent investigation of Trump was about as independent from the Biden White House as the DNC is independent from the Biden White House. It was hand in glove. And to me, it's a further indication of the vindictive, selective prosecution targeting Trump. You know, this archives treated Bill Clinton with kid gloves because we saw it directly. They argued with us over tapes he had that were seemingly classified in part, but then they did a 180 to go after Trump. And we see they did it with the support of the White House. The raid on Trump wouldn't have happened without support of the White House. Of course, it stands to reason that a former president subject to criminal investigations never seen before in American history, that the idea that that would be done without White House involvement at the most senior levels, you know, it's obvious that's what happened, and the documents show it's proof positive. And by the way, Mr. Smith I just love him talking about all his expert prosecutors working for him. Yeah. He's trying to hide the names of the senior prosecutors who are working for him from Judicial Watch. He doesn't want any of those names disclosed. Yeah. Why is that? Secrecy upon secrecy. Very unusual for criminal investigations of this nature. And kudos to Judge Cannon for doing this. Right. They're hiding the names of witnesses. There are other pleadings that need to come forward so we get a full view of the corruption behind the Justice Department persecution of Trump.
It's very obvious that at some point, the people that actually run this country made a decision that they could not stand, no matter what the American people want. This man, they could not stand anymore. And they said, you know, they were going to abandon all of I think some of the most important tenets of this country to just destroy him. And now they're facing, I think, the backlash of it and the exposure of what they have done here in those years after January 6th, which, of course, as we know, was the greatest political moment for the Democrat Party and for the establishment that they could have imagined for. Does it feel to you like that there are indications that that they knew this indictment was going to be weak, that Jack Smith knows how weak this case is? They just wanted to get another indictment on him, even if it didn't go through, because this case specifically looks It just looks really terrible. How do you convict espionage if Jack Smith knew that you had the government telling you to go pick up these boxes 7 months after you left the White House, and you were already working on charges at that point, and there's a very good chance that they told him to come pick up boxes that had classified information in it. The case is dead.
You would think. It's just another indication it was a setup from the get-go. They set Trump up almost immediately with the partisans at the archives pretending that he had documents he had no right to, which wasn't the law and it wasn't the legal position of the Justice Department previously. So they fooled Trump and his people initially. And of course, then Trump started figuring out maybe there's something going on here, yet he still cooperated, but that wasn't good enough for him. And I know Smith was desperate to get this indictment because I was involved in this grand jury process. They sent the FBI come knocking at my door before he was appointed. And then they're like, okay, well, you can come and talk to us informally. You don't have to come before the grand jury. Smith gets appointed a few weeks later, and all of a sudden they did this remarkable turnaround. Oh, forget about that promise to come talk informally. We've got a grand jury. And of course, I went in and told them they were all wet, but of course they didn't care because it was all about getting Trump. It was like going before an MSNBC panel, those prosecutors, as opposed to any fact finder of that you could be assured that there was justice being fairly administered.
And, you know, you have to wonder. I mean, we have some transparency here on this case. First off, how does Eileen Cannon not dump the case after what we've seen? The optics look so terrible. It looks so fascist to have Biden get off so easy for this, Trump facing prison. But also imagine if we had this transparency in the other Trump cases. Imagine what Juan Merchan is concealing, you know, potentially about Alvin Bragg's case. He doesn't give one legal victory to the Trump team. You know, how dirty these cases all are.
Jay, if Trump is elected president, if I were him, I would appoint a special counsel to investigate all of this. Yeah. This grand conspiracy against him to deprive him and other Americans of their civil rights under color of law, and the Justice Department, Fulton County, up in New York, they should all be brought in and be subject to a full federal civil rights investigation over this election interference and targeting of American and other targeting of Trump and other innocent Americans.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the media's reaction if he pulls that move. They go nuts over that. Tom Fitton, we appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Well, you know, that last point I think is especially salient because I think that's what needs to be done if Trump wins. And I don't know if Trump's going to win or not, but if he does win, there should be a significant criminal investigation into this election interference by the Biden regime and their Democratic Party allies in the various states. There's got to be accountability for it. There's got to be accountability for it. And I encourage Trump to consider that. And we have this information, as we're saying, showing in Miami, it's corrupt, showing in New York City, it's corrupt. Even the testimony showing it's corrupt. And then the Supreme Court could eviscerate the charges against Trump in both Miami and here in D.C., depending on how they rule on two key cases related to presidential immunity and the wild expansion of a federal law designed to prevent obstruction of justice in financial investigations to include obstruction of a proceeding in Congress. Now, it's interesting they tried to use that law to go after the January 6ers. They have used the law to go after January 6ers, and they're disputing about whether that applies. Are they going to use the law to go after our next topic, the communist revolutionaries rampaging across college campuses in the United States of America? I doubt it. Are you aware of any federal arrest of any of these communists in the last week or two? I'm not. Where are the feds? In location after location, Columbia University, UCLA, there was a battle between the communist protesters and so-called counter-protesters that lasted for 3 hours. You know, some colleges and some student bodies are standing against it, while others are kowtowing to the commies. We have this nice video of students in Ole Miss singing the Pledge of Allegiance in the face of these anti-American communists. And they say they're there to free Palestine. No, they're there to overthrow America. Free Palestine is just the latest code word they have for a communist revolution. I don't know, do we have that Ole Miss video? And compare and contrast that to the communists up in Colombia, both students and outside so-called agitators. Oh, did you know that there are outside agitators now that come in and incite violence and other lawlessness? It's interesting to know, because you weren't allowed to mention that with relation to January 6th. But here what was going on up in Colombia. Oh, there's my tweet on it. Chaos actors. I mean, the left, you know, this Antifa movement, this communist movement to overthrow America is still active, and they see these campus protests as a vehicle that they help manage, create, and escalate to achieve their radical revolution. The communist terrorist protests on college campuses are about as organic as plastic straws. Why do they all look the same? It looks like they all buy. It looks like they're all using the same tents. Let's look at the video of them, the violent insurrectionist going into the one of the school buildings in Columbia University. I mean, just look how violent it is. Cleared out that the New York City police finally came in and cleared it out after Columbia, the leadership of Columbia. The liberal elites are going to get America destroyed because of their coddling of their communist comrades. I mean, they're not literally all communists, although many of them are Marxist in orientation. Much of the academy at the university level and the social, I'll call it the soft sciences, you know, not, although it's now seeping into hard sciences, it's Marxist in orientation. So it's inherently revolutionary. So these students always have a friendly environment, and when they go and put tents up on the property, it's inherently an escalation. It's a violation of the rules. It's often a violation of the law, and campus leaders often refuse initially to deal with it. In fact, many campuses have negotiated. I think Northwestern, for instance, there was a report negotiated essentially how to advance the revolution. Jonathan Turley, who went to Northwestern, reported how that university reportedly reached a negotiated settlement with protesters to include a committee to consider divesting from Israel. Now, when you hear divesting from Israel, that means they want to destroy Israel. That's code for destruction of Israel. And special housing for Muslim students in addition to other concessions. And so when they talk about special housing for Muslim students, that's segregation. And of course, the left now supports segregation based on ethnicity, religion, and other reasons. I thought we were opposed to segregation. No, the left doesn't oppose segregation if it advances the revolution. And the way to advance the revolution is to divide America, cause chaos and instability in our nation. And thankfully, you know, things, you know, people or there are local police who are trying to enforce the law. We have some video, I think, of a Georgia state trooper here taking on one of the communists. Let's go to that video. There you go, that trooper. Look at him tackling him. Boom. He must have played football in a previous life. And it looks like the same trooper picked up this kid like a rag doll. Look at this as he's trying to enforce the law. Drops dead, dead weight. Oh.
Help! Help! Help!
I'm still not sure, and I don't mean this as an insult, whether it was a man or a woman. I'm assuming it's a man. But if I were only 25 years younger, I'd love to be able to do that. And I'm sure many of you would too. But God bless that trooper for enforcing the law. And and pray for the police that they're not harmed as they try to enforce the law against those who would destroy America. And compare and contrast, it can't be said enough, the federal government's treatment of these insurrectionists with the treatment of the January 6th defendants. So they go and engage in the takeover of UCLA, a public institution, in order to change a policy? Isn't that insurrection? Where's the federal government investigating this? It's clear it's a national movement. I guarantee you there's a transnational aspect to it. Foreign funding. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal, I guess it was last week, and I was reading it, and they quoted some seemingly radical commie type, and and it was the name of an organization I've never heard of before. So I said, I wonder what this group was about, and I went and looked it up, and it's like Black Lives Matter initially was not an independent entity. It was what is called under the IRS rules a fiscally sponsored organization, meaning it was essentially a creature wholly of another entity. And in the case of Black Lives Matter, at least the major group, it initially was the creature of a foundation or an entity that had ties to terrorists. And so that became a controversy. And they moved over to another left-wing group where they were fiscally sponsored. And I think eventually they spun off and became their own entity. But the left has perfected this technique of fiscally sponsoring organizations. So let's say technically Judicial Watch could do it. We could decide to create a fiscally sponsored organization, and it would be called something else, and the organization could do anything they could within the law governing C3 organizations. They get all the benefits of being a nonprofit charity like Judicial Watch and can engage in similar activity or activity allowed for under those rules. But essentially it's Judicial Watch, and we can turn it on and turn it off anytime we want. And the right really hasn't done much of that at all, but the left has been doing it hundreds and hundreds of groups. And so that's, to me, a very interesting point to be made in terms of understanding how this is being funded and organized. It's usually quite, it's not like it's an octopus where there's tens of thousands of people supporting this activity financially. It's a few left-wing foundations that are supporting this violent activity. Now, under the new rules and the rules that they were pursuing against Trump World, and anyone who dared to dispute an election, you would think, fairly applied, they would be investigating everyone behind these violent eruptions. But no. Biden couldn't be bothered to say anything about it till the other day, and then it was like, oh, both sides do it, and he didn't necessarily condemn the goals of these groups, which is to destroy America and to destroy Israel. I mean, there was another video we wanted to show some of the craziness going on. I forget, what was that? The third video we were going to do the look in. I encourage you to share this video with your friends and family and colleagues, because they may not see this violence if they're not watching the news, or they're not like hyper online like many of us are who are activists. I mean, just because you've seen it doesn't mean your friends and family have seen it, but that's today's left. And you're getting a free pass from the Biden administration and tacit support. Members of Congress are supporting the communists over the police. AOC keeps on tweeting out support, attacking the police for daring to enforce the law, or the very idea that the laws would be enforced against these communists. And again, I'm not going to pretend they're protesters who are pro-Palestinian. I don't even know what that means. Israel is in a war with Hamas, a terrorist organization. So what does that have to do with Palestinians? You support, it's like saying I'm pro-German when you're at war with the Nazis. What does that mean? And what's Biden's response to this? Oh, well, maybe I'll bring in some of these Palestinian supporters of terrorism here to the United States, the refugees. You know how that's going to work out. And I'd like to know how many foreign nationals are involved in these demonstrations designed to overthrow the United States. Someone posted, and I noted, the more you know, at Northeastern. Is that what it says, Northeastern? 58% of students are foreign students. At Columbia, 55% are foreign students. So does that mean they were all, that those are similar numbers out front? I don't know. But don't you want to know that? Because it seems to me, if we have foreign nationals engaged in illegal demonstrations here in the United States, and we have foreign nationals here in the United States supporting terrorist activities abroad and the overthrow of our nation, they should be thrown out. Thrown out immediately. And there's zero interest from this administration to do so. Now, you can be sure that it's not just going to be me talking about this right now. We have probably, I would say, 10 to 15 FOIAs already out there on these campus demonstrations. So we're going to try to figure out what went on, who's covering it up, who failed to act to protect students. I mean, if you're a Jew on these college campuses, what must you be thinking? We had this poor kid, there's a video of this poor kid, he's trying to make the point, it looked like, to try to get into his campus, and this is what happened to him. Looks like a Jewish student.
You guys have closed the entrance. We are UCLA students. I have my ID right here. I'm being blocked off, not by the security guard, but by you two. You three. Oh, look, they're making their burger while I'm going this way. Excuse me. This is what they do. Everybody, look at this. Look at this. I'm a UCLA student. I deserve to go here. We pay tuition. This is our school. And they're not letting me walk in. My class is over there. I want to use that entrance. Why can't they go? Will you let me go in? This can be over in a second. Just let me and my friends go in to class.
We're not engaging with that.
Then you can move. Will you move?
We're not engaging with that.
Okay, we're going. We're going. I'm going in. I have my hands up. I'm not hurting them.
I tell you, I would probably try to get past them. He's more patient than I would be. And it's not just the commie students, they're commie faculty members engaging in this vicious anti-Jew, anti-American communism. Look it up in Columbia. They're defending the students with lawless activity. And law and order. But let's end on a good note. There were these brave students, I think, in UNC, who were defending the American flag. Getting attacked. See a water bottle getting thrown in the set. There we go. Americans, patriots at these schools, and they're the ones being victimized. And some of them are brave, and it's here in our nation's capital as well. George Washington University, where I went to school, has been taken over by the Hamas terrorist wing. Left-wing terrorist supporters protected from arrest by Democratic D.C. Mayor Bowser seek to expel all Jews from Israel. Students will leave, look at this. Students will leave when Israelis leave. Students will go back home when Israelis go back to Europe. Their real homes. And this is what's happening here in D.C. The Democratic mayor of D.C., this happened over the weekend. Mayor Bowser ordered the police to stand down, and the chief of police did this too, and refused a request from George Washington University to remove leftist terrorist supporters illegally occupying the campus. And the Washington Post reported specifically, officers had assembled around 3 a.m. and were prepared to enter the encampment, but senior leaders in the police chief's and mayor's office ordered them to stand down, the official said. Today's chaos, and by the way, did you see this White House Correspondents' Dinner? It was chaos. Of course, the media does, it was their party. They didn't want to ruin it by reporting the full truth about what was going on. There was chaos on the streets outside the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And the dinner is located at a big hotel in the center of D.C., and the attendees had to walk through, and it was a presidential event, so security was heightened because Joe Biden was there to cackle with his friends, attacking Trump and conservatives. But they had to walk through crowds of harassing communist terrorist supporters, and it further confirms the extremist left have effective control of our nation's capital and can shut down the city on a whim, largely because the folks running this city allow it to happen. And if you want to know how January 6th happened, that's how it happened. Because security was not present on January 6th because they thought having a secure presence or a significant police presence at the U.S. Capitol, whether it be National Guard or D.C. Police or federal authorities generally, would have benefited President Trump. And they didn't want to do it. Because I'm convinced they thought their leftist friends were going to come up and beat up Trump supporters, and they didn't want the cops to get in the way. And it turned into the situation it turned into on January 6th because of the lack of security as that crowd came up to the Capitol and chaos ensued. So hopefully things calm down. I was thinking maybe things will calm down a little bit because all these loser students are going to be going home in the next month or so, back to their rich families, who evidently they want to destroy too, because they're part of the system they want to overthrow in the communist revolution. But I guess, the media isn't interested in figuring out who's doing this, right? I mean, if you're a Columbia student, you're typically there because you come from a successful background. Your family is successful. Every student obviously isn't like that, but most are. And when you're talking about these major colleges and universities, almost everyone there is from privileged backgrounds. And there's nothing wrong from coming from a privileged background. But we have to recognize these are the elites who are trying to destroy your country. With the support, tepid sometimes, quiet, or vocal, if you're AOC, of elected officials here in Washington, D.C., and people who know better in the states, etc. I mean, the next big fight, potentially, or the next big civil unrest, I don't know how soon these college campuses are going to stop. Democratic National Committee, they have their convention, I think, in August. And then the Republican convention, or actually Republican conventions before that in July in Milwaukee. The chaos actors will seek to cause chaos to undermine America during our election season with the goal of destroying the country. Let's be blunt about it. And it's up to you, dear American citizen, to ensure that your leaders enforce the rule of law. All of that you saw happening is the result of failures of leadership by college university presidents, or here in D.C. by the mayor and the police chief. When you see lawlessness, especially in a mass civil context like this, it's the result of political decision making. It doesn't have to be this way. I mean, there are plenty of troopers or guys like that trooper that we showed. Let's run that video of that trooper picking up that kid again. Oh, we deleted the video. Remember the trooper picking up the kid. Plenty of cops more than happy to do whatever it takes to enforce the rule of law under the rule of law. So I keep on rubbing my eye. My doctor's going to yell at me if she's watching, my ophthalmologist, because I've got like pink eye, so my eye's irritated and tearing all the time. I'm not crying. Next up is another scandal from the Biden administration. Now, Joe Biden, as you recall, and I've talked about this just the other day, was interviewed by Special Counsel Hur twice. It was like over the course of 2 days. It was 2 interviews. And that transcript of that of those interviews have been released to Congress and released to the public. Judicial Watch had sued for them. All records about that interview process. And as a result of those interviews, Hur concluded that Joe Biden's memory is terrible and no jury would ever convict him for crimes that he committed. I think that's a fair analysis. And many people were outraged, including yours truly. Why on earth would someone like President Biden be allowed to get a get-out-of-jail-free card because he has a failing memory, but he's still allowed to be president of the United States? And that can't be a legitimate reason for not prosecuting him. And of course, the Biden administration was angry at her for using this as an excuse because politically it was extremely damaging to him. It's not that it wasn't true, but damaging. Of course, they would say it's not true. And one way to solve this debate, because we have seen the transcript, is to hear what he said on audio. And they have the audio tapes, and they don't want to turn them over to Judicial Watch. We had sued for them, and they were giving us the runaround. I talked about how they were stonewalling. They didn't even want to tell us where they were going to give them to us. And finally, we pushed and pushed and pushed, and the court agreed that you got to tell Judicial Watch what you're going to do so we can move this case along. And they just told us the other day that they're not going to give us these audio tapes to protect Joe Biden's privacy. The President of the United States has a privacy interest in the sound of his voice. Do you think I have a privacy interest in the sound of my voice? And I'm just, President of Judicial Watch. He's President of the United States. The idea we're violating his privacy by hearing his voice in a federal criminal investigation, it's absurd. But these are the specific citations they use to federal law, or that allow them, under court interpretations and such. FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, provides 2 exemptions, and this is from the Department of Justice's website. Provides 2 exemptions to protect personal privacy, exemptions 6 and 7C. And there are other exemptions related to personal privacy, but those are the 2 most used ones. Exemption 6 applies to personnel, like, your HR file and medical files and similar files, when disclosure of such information, and this is the government's description, emphasis, would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. And 7C is related to criminal investigation privacy. Applies to records of information compiled for law enforcement purposes that the disclosure of which, again, could reasonably be expected to constitute an unwarranted invasion of personal privacy. So they are telling us that the voice of President Biden answering questions under oath in a criminal investigation, unprecedented in scope and nature in some ways, would be a clearly unwarranted invasion of his personal privacy. There you have the Biden administration playing lawyer for Joe Biden personally, providing him political cover, and now we're going to be fighting for months over it. So the result of them doing this, the Biden administration doing this, is to keep this tape away from you so you can't hear it during an election season. It may not even be resolved until after the election at this rate. Through this fraudulent assertion of privacy. Now, typically, when there is a privacy interest you have in personal information. Like, for instance, if Joe Biden said during the deposition, during the audio, and they said, tell us your name, address, and social security number. His home address, his social security number, they could black that out, or they could bleep that out in an audio, and they'd get no objection from Judicial Watch. We know the sorts of things that are typically protected under privacy exemptions. Social security numbers, personal email addresses, home addresses, some other detail and data, or even your identity sometimes. If you're an outsider communicating with the government, sometimes that's protected. It's expanded to include the protection of government workers' identities, which is often outrageous since they work for us. We need to know who's making decisions, but that's another matter. As I say in my comment, this is yet another brazen cover-up. The Biden Justice Department's political gambit, it is a gambit, in asserting Joe Biden's privacy concerns in order to withhold audio of his criminal interviews with the special counsel really takes the cake. Obviously, the public's right to know outweighs Joe Biden's privacy in this widely public case. And of course, Biden can simply waive any privacy so the public can fully understand why he was given a pass from criminal prosecution. So as I was beginning to say, and I made the point in my comment there, is that there is you weigh the privacy against the public's right to know. So it's a balancing test. And what the government's saying is there's no way that Joe Biden's voice and our interest in hearing him, how he comported himself in this interview and how he talked and such, that he has a privacy interest there that outweighs the public interest in figuring out whether or not he's a crook or not. And the chutzpah of this administration jumping in to protect the so-called rights of Joe Biden, as they've done nothing but eviscerate the rights of President Trump, saying he had no presidential executive privilege. He had no attorney-client privileges that could be protected. All sorts of privileges typically afforded to presidents and criminal defendants, they came in and tore apart and blew up. And here there's an audio of Biden being interviewed by a special counsel of the United States for the Justice Department, and we can't hear the audio because of his privacy rights. I tell you, it reminds me of another outrageous assertion of privacy by a prior administration. I think this was the Biden administration. I mean, the George W. Bush administration. Could have been Obama. I don't remember. It doesn't matter because usually they're similarly absurd, Republican or Democrat, in sometimes these exemptions. But we had a big FOIA request on 9/11, and we got these documents, and it became readily apparent that they were blacking out Osama bin Laden's name after 9/11 from Washington Post reports. So they give us a news article under FOIA, and they black out the name. And their argument was that that Osama bin Laden was, even though he's a terrorist who murdered 3,000 Americans, he had a privacy interest that needed to be protected. Can you believe it? Now, they backed off when we screamed bloody murder about it. Now, I'm not saying Joe Biden is like Osama bin Laden. I'm just saying that his privacy interest is very small and certainly doesn't apply to the sound of his voice. Incredible. So we're going to continue. We're going to argue this in court. We're in court with, ironically, we're on the side of CNN. CNN had separately filed a lawsuit. Now they're likely to be consolidated with Judicial Watch's lawsuit. And our friends over at the Heritage Foundation have also sued. So we're all going to be fighting for the truth together. And it shows you that when it comes to transparency in government, they're often strange bedfellows. I mean, we're often on the side of the media for transparency in government. And, you know, one thing I kind of try to remind politicians is that both Democrats and Republicans, even though they often don't, when push comes to shove, are transparent. But certainly Republicans and Democrat voters alike support transparency in government. So I think it's probably not only good policy for a government ruled of law as opposed to men, a republic, but it's good politics. I mean, who's against transparency in government? Who's going to run for president or senator or congressman saying we need to be less transparent? I'm running for mayor and I'm going to cut off public information. The American people don't have a right to know what their government's up to. So we need more transparency in government. We need politicians who not only pay lip service to it, but stand strong for it, especially in politically inconvenient circumstances like what we're saying. Now, you know, if Joe Biden were smart, because he's not going to get prosecuted. I mean, I'm outraged about him not getting prosecuted, but he's not going to get prosecuted. He'd say, I don't, release it. I don't have anything to hide. And I think he is smart, or smart enough, or people around him who are making decisions, assuming he's cognitively impaired, are smart enough to know that would be probably Fitton's right. He has nothing to hide. That would be a good political argument. Unless, of course, he does have something to hide, which is that the audio transcript would confirm the concerns Americans have about his cognitive temperament, his cognitive ability, his temperament, his memory, etc. So the battle begins once again. Simple FOIA request, just give us the darn audio of those tapes that we had congressional hearings on. Why can't we get audio? We got transcript. Give us the audio. Nope. It's now literally a federal case. But Judicial Watch isn't going to be cowed. We're going to keep on doing the heavy lifting for the rule of law, for transparency, for your right to know. And we do it with your support. So with that, pray for America, because we're under a communist attack right now. Pray for President Trump, who's a crime victim like no other in the history of American politics. And pray for our country generally that we're able to get through the current crisis. And I encourage you to support Judicial Watch's work. If you think this type of work is important, if you support having a group like Judicial Watch in D.C., pushing for the right to know, pushing back against government corruption, standing firm for election integrity, suing to ensure your votes are secured and are not negated by voter fraud, then you'll support Judicial Watch. Go to judicialwatch.org, judicialwatch.org, and make a donation. And if you've already made a donation, I encourage you to make another one, because we've got more work to do. Thank you, and I'll see you here next week on the Judicial Watch Weekly Update. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.